Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Sporty's webinar presentation on the Garmin GFC 600 Autopilot. My name's Eric Radke. I'm from Sporty's Academy, the educational division of Sporty's Pilot Shop, and I'm your facilitator for this evening. With respect to Sporty's Pilot Shop, a big thank you for their sponsorship of this free webinar series that Sporty's hosts, which tackles a lot of interesting and diverse aviation topics, brought to you in the comfort of wherever you absolutely want to be connected online this evening. I'm very pleased to have with us tonight from the Garmin training team, Mr. Matthew Clark and Mr. Gabriel Parkinson. Matt is going to be doing most of the talking tonight, but in order to be timely and prompt with any questions that you may have on the GFC 600, we will also have Gabe in the background that will be answering questions for you via the GoToWebinar platform. We certainly from Sporty's appreciate all your patronage whenever you're in need of training content, pilot supplies. We appreciate you thinking of Sportys.com, and the same can be said for Garmin. If you're thinking Autopilot, if you're thinking Navigator, if you're thinking anything flight display or flight instrumentation, think of that team at the Garmin that's always innovating. And speaking of that, but just before we get into the content piece, just a few admin items. I do want to remind everyone that we record all of our webinar presentations. So if you do miss a particular point or have to step away, you're welcome to do so, and you will be able to come back in our webinar archives or on our YouTube channels, and you'll be able to view and hear the content over as much as you'd like. Also, as I just alluded to, feel free throughout the presentation, if questions come up, you can submit those via the GoToWebinar platform. So back to the topic at hand. Certainly Garmin Aviation has a great history of innovating, delivering revolutionary avionics products that change the way we fly. They make us safer, they make us more capable of aviators, and it was no exception in the summer of 2017 when they made a big splash and big waves and brought some much needed energy to the aftermarket autopilot side of things when they introduced the GFC 500 and 600 aftermarket autopilots, digital autopilots derived from the celebrated GFC 700 autopilot. The GFC 500, of course, designed for the light single-engine airplanes, and its older brother, the GFC 600, for those high-performance singles, the twins, all the way up into the turbine class airplanes. So, you know, from a price point perspective and from all the features you get, it really blew the industry back, and we're happy to have the Garmin Aviation training team with us to talk to us much more in depth about what you can get from the GFC 600 autopilot. So with that, I'm happy to turn things over to your presenter, lead presenter for tonight, Mr. Matt Clark from Garmin. Matt, welcome.
Well, thank you, Eric. Thank you guys for having me back with you guys. As Eric said, my name is Matt Clark. I am an aviation pilot trainer for Garmin International. If anybody's listened to the TXi presentation I did last year, this will be kind of a similar feel to what you saw last year. Or if anybody's seen me at Oshkosh, you have a face you can put with my name. A little bit about my background before we jump in here. As I said, I am a pilot trainer here at Ford Garmin. That is my full-time job here. I've been with Garmin coming up on 4 years now. Started out with the pilot operations team. So I was on the phones taking database calls, operation calls, everything from the pilot side of things. After that, on the phone for a couple of years, I joined the training team and been teaching there. Here we teach everything from GTNs, G500s, TXIs, G1000, 3, 5000. If there's a flying, you can fly behind it, we can train on it. So a little bit about tonight here. We're going to talk a little bit more about the system components, a little bit of the system layout, some common potential layouts that may or may not be in your aircraft, and then we're going to get more into the training side. The different AFCS statuses and annunciations, how we can see them, what they're telling us. It's going through a more in-depth discussion on the different lateral modes, different vertical modes, as well as our electronic stability and protection, our ESP, and what that's going to bring to us, trying to bring a higher level of safety to how we fly. Talk a little bit briefly about a couple common abnormal operations. And then we're going to walk through a flight scenario together, how we can use the autopilot from takeoff all the way down to landing. Throughout the entire webinar here, as Eric was saying, please submit your questions to the webinar as you come up. We will try to do our best to answer as many of those questions as we can. If we are unable to answer those, please send us an email to aviationtraining.webinar@garmin.com. So anything that does not get answered, that you really need to know what that answer is, shoot us an email and we'll be glad to get back to you. The email address will stay up in the upper right-hand corner for the rest of the presentation. So if you missed it off this slide, don't worry about it. We've still got you covered. Towards the end of the presentation, we are going to try to answer a couple of the common questions, and we'll try to keep the webinar open as long as we can to answer any of those last-minute questions anybody may have out there. Without further ado, let's jump right in. So first and foremost, we're going to talk about the system components, system layouts, and what the different LRUs, the different line replaceable units, the different pieces of hardware that we're going to have as part of this system. So first and foremost is what we see on here, the GMC 605 mode controller. This could be thought of more or less as the brains of this. It's compatible with a wide range of aircraft, as Eric was saying, intended for high performance single engine aircraft, twin engine aircraft, and into the turbine category of aircraft. Nice thing with this autopilot compared to, say, the GFC 500 or some of the other autopilots, this is designed as a standalone unit. All Garmin autopilots are attitude-based autopilots, meaning we need to have an AHRS or an attitude and heading reference system feeding data in. Nice thing with this particular piece of equipment is it's its own AHRS source. So we don't have to have a standalone AHRS. We don't have to have that G500 or a TXi display to provide that source for us. This guy will do it by itself. And it will interface to a wide variety of course, Garmin flight displays, as well as some third-party displays and a wide range of potential nav sources. The other big key that's going to be driving the autopilot is our GSA87, our smart servos. On board, they have their own onboard microprocessors. They have the electronic torque and speed sensing, brushless motors. A lot of us are going to ask, well, what is that actually going to do for me? Well, how does that help me? Well, it's a very smooth servo. It's brushless. There's no clutch with it. Compared to some other autopilots that are a little bit more aggressive, this is a much more fluid, much more dynamic. When you turn the autopilot on, when the servos start driving the system, it's very smooth. It's probably smoother than what I can fly the aircraft. Since it is that brushless motor design, and because there's no mechanical slip clutch, it does have a little bit greater reliability over older servos, older designs. It also means you have a lower maintenance cost, lower maintenance and lower inspection costs as the life of the aircraft continues. So not only are you seeing a discount right off the bat, but you're going to see a discount through the life of the airframe. An optional piece of equipment for us is our GI-285 mode annunciator. Now, as we go back to the GMC 605, you do see some of the enunciations on the display, on the box itself. But depending on where this piece of equipment is mounted, it may not be in your primary field of view. So we may need, and depending on what other primary flight display we have, we may need an alternate mode annunciator so we can see what is our active mode, what's our armed mode, and so on. They are going to color code just the way Garmin codes all of our other autopilots. And very similar footprint to some other third-party annunciators that are out there. It does have the LED lights, long-term reliability. Great option if you don't have a Garmin primary flight display. So basic layout here. On the left, we see the GMC 605. You've got the annunciations on there. Really, you can hook this up to a standard HSI, what we're seeing in the lower right, as well as just a standard COM or COM nav radio. What we're seeing here is our one of our GTR radios. And then basic-wise on servos is your pitch and your roll servo. That's going to be the very bare minimum that you're going to get for the GFC 600. If you want the option, you can do a pitch trim as well, so it'll automatically trim the aircraft out for you. A great addition for you. And we can also have the addition of a yaw damper if you need it for your aircraft. And then, as we said before, if your GMC 605 is not in your primary field of view, then we're going to have that additional mode annunciator. So this is fairly basic, fairly simple, basic layout of how we could use or how we could have the GFC 600. Another great config here, this will work with the GNS series navigators, your GNS 430, 530 WAS navigators. You can have those standalone. Instead of having that GTR, you could run it with the GNS. Now, those are still very, very popular, still rock solid boxes out there. That would give you your approach, let the aircraft fly approaches down to mins, as well as your primary GPS nav and your localizer VOR guidance there. You're also seeing the addition of a G500 or legacy G500, G600. Notice in this configuration, we don't have the mode annunciator. That's because our mode annunciations, our autopilot annunciations, are also going to be displayed on the top of the G500. We're going to talk a little bit more about that here in just a little bit. Another setup here is with the GTN series navigators. And the GTN and with either a G500, G600, or as I go to my next slide here with the TXi display, it's going to bring in the full capability of the autopilot. If I go back to the GNS, you do lose the functionality of our en route vertical navigation. With the GTN, we do have that feature. And when we get into the scenario, we'll see how that's going to interact with us just a little bit more. And then our optimal configuration here with the GFC 600, a GTN 650 or 750, and in this case our TXi displays. So whichever flavor of TXi, whether you go with our larger screen, which what we see here, or with our smaller screens, you will see all your mode annunciations, everything there will pop up on your primary flight display. So that was basic overview, basic idea of what equipment we're going to have in the aircraft and what system layouts are going to be. Moving in, we're going to go look at the different annunciations, what we're going to see both on the 605 as well as what we're going to see on our primary flight displays. So first, taking a look at the GMC, we're going to see our autopilot engagement sections on the left side there. Obviously, the top is our autopilot button. That's what allows us to turn the autopilot on, turn it off. Under there is your flight director and then your yaw damper. Nice thing with this is your flight director can be turned on separately than the autopilot. So if you want to fly, you're trying to do that precision approach, but you want to hand fly it, but you like having that additional guidance from the flight director, great, let's have it turned on. Let's use that flight director and have that extra situational awareness. In the center of it is where we're going to see all of our other annunciations. On the far left side where it says roll and nav, that's going to be your lateral mode selection. In this case, the bigger, bolder letters up on top of the display are your active mode. So currently this system is in a roll mode. And then the smaller letters on the bottom, those are our armed modes. In this case, nav, that is our armed status. The center section is our vertical mode. In this case, we're in a similar or same thing that we saw on the lateral side. Big letters up on the top telling us what's the active mode. Letters on the bottom tell us what's armed. So we're in a pitch mode, and we've got an altitude select armed. The right side is if we have any messages. In this case, you see an elevator trim up, or if you had an autopilot fail, any sort of system-driven message, this is where we're going to see that. Taking a look, if we do have a G500 or G600, we said earlier, you do see your mode annunciations on top of the display like you see here. On the left side is going to be your lateral status. We see it as GPS here. Your center section, just looking at this screenshot, we have the autopilot and yaw damper turned on. And the right side of that is your vertical mode with vertical speed selected and an altitude select and an armed status. If anybody's flown our G1000 or 5000 series, these are in the same order, the same spots that you'd be used to seeing them on your primary flight displays. If you're running with a TXi display, guess what? It's the exact same spot, exact same location. Left side still our lateral status. In this case, we're in a heading mode. Center section is telling us what, or is telling us our autopilot status. In this case, autopilot and yaw damper. Right side of the display, your pitch mode, and your ALTS, your altitude select. Continuing on with Garmin logic, the way we like to color code things, green is your active status. So if you're always, I've heard several times, I don't know where my autopilot's taking me, I don't know what mode I have selected. We know the active mode because we can see it in green on the top of our display, or we see the bigger letters on the GMC. Always know what your active status is doing. White is your armed mode, such as altitude select. If you're too far off course, you should see that as GPS. If you arm an approach, it'd be your localizer or your glide slope. Anything white is armed, meaning it is waiting for us to do something. It's waiting to get to a point where it can become active. Yellow, if you see a yellow, in this case here, we have the autopilot AP displayed. If you see that, that means the autopilot has disengaged, or a mode is disengaging. If I manually change a CDI source, you'd see GPS start flashing yellow. If I hit my autopilot disconnect on a yoke, or if I hit the AP button on the GMC, you would see that AP start flashing. That means we have disengaged. I can't stress this one enough. Always verify what your active and your armed modes are. Don't let the autopilot take you somewhere you don't want to go. There was a CJ crash I'm going to say a year or two ago that actually referenced this very issue. Wound up in about a 65-degree bank, nose down, and unfortunately perished in that crash, all because he thought he had the autopilots turned on and selected, and in reality, the autopilot was never engaged. So verify your active and your armed status. So moving on from that here, let's talk a little bit more about our lateral modes. So we're going to talk lateral, then we're going to talk vertical. We're always going to use the two in conjunction with each other. The default mode, when we turn the autopilot on, it's going to go into a roll mode. What this is doing is it's trying to get the aircraft to wings level. That's the whole intent of roll mode. If you run a CWS switch or a control wheel steering switch, I can set a specific bank angle if I need to, but by default, it's going to try to roll the aircraft to wings level. Now, roll mode is not following any sort of nav guidance. It's not following your heading bug. It's not following your nav course. It's just keeping the wings level. If I need to go fly a heading bug, then I'm going to go ahead. I'll hit that HDG button, the heading button, and now it's going to follow my heading bug and my HSI. Pretty straightforward on that one. Nav mode, just like it sounds, you're going to follow whatever nav course we're getting from our navigator. This could be a VOR radial if you're on green needles or you're tracking a raw localizer or raw nav aid. This could be your GPS course guidance as you're flying along. Nav means you're flying that en route course. Approach mode is what we're going to need. If we're trying to shoot that LPV approach, or we're coming in trying to capture that ILS, we can arm the approach mode. And if you're doing an ILS, you'll see an LOC annunciation under the roll down there. That's telling me laterally it's ready to accept the localizer. If you start doing this with GPS approaches and GPS is already your nav source you're following, you won't see another annunciation because you're already following a GPS lateral guidance. The last one, I'm not sure how many people still fly back courses. I still make my students fly them all the time, is our back course button. If we are intending to fly a back course, instead of hitting approach mode, we're going to hit back course mode. That way it knows that we are going to be reverse sensing. It knows which way it needs to fly and to get us safely down. So those were the lateral modes. Now, as we said, we're going to use this in conjunction with our vertical modes. So just like on the lateral side, when I turn the autopilot on, initially, I'm going to roll into a pitch mode. This is keeping my aircraft in a level pitch attitude. I do have the ability on this to adjust that pitch. Using that down and up wheel on the far right side of the 605, I can adjust that pitch in 0.5 degree increments. Some people think on a go around, the aircraft a lot of times will pitch you to 7 degrees. Here I can fine tune that if I need to. The VNAV button allows you to do, well, just that. It does en route vertical navigation. Now, don't get VNAV confused with the vertical guidance provided off an approach. This is en route VNAV, or as we call it, enhanced descent VNAV. So imagine you're flying along, you get assigned an arrival, and they tell you to descend via. If you have the GTN with software 651, the latest version, then you have the ability to fly that VNAV arrival down simply by arming and activating that vertical nav button. Differing from, say, a VCalc, where that is simply telling you when to descend, the GTN with 651 will give you an actual flight path angle to follow down, and that VNAV button lets us couple to it. Indicated airspeed mode, or IAS mode, is going to capture whatever your current airspeed, and we can dial that in. I like to use IAS in climb modes, where I can set this to my cruise climb or set to VY, whatever I want to set it to. What it's going to do is it's going to force the aircraft to fly that speed. So as we go higher and higher in altitude and my speed wants to start bleeding off, the aircraft will start shallowing the climb. It's going to do everything in its power to continue maintaining whatever our selected airspeed is. Vertical speed, and then before I go into vertical speed there, you can adjust that. So as soon as you hit IAS, it's going to whatever your current airspeed is, and then using that up and down wheel, adjust it and fine tune it as we need. Vertical speed, very similar in that in the operation there. I like to use vertical speed as a descent. ATC tells me descend and maintain 3,000. So I can pre-select 3,000 on my primary flight display, select my vertical speed. Just like the IAS mode, it's going to default to whatever my current vertical speed is. So I hit vertical speed, and then I can use that up and down wheel and select the vertical speed that I want to fly at. The other two buttons on there, we have the ALT, which is your altitude hold button. Pressing the Alt button is going to level you off wherever you are right now. When we get into a little more of the scenario here, you'll see that the system is going to default back to that on a routine basis. It's trying to get us back to that constant altitude hold. The last button there is our level button. Most pilots running G1000 or GFC 700 don't have that. I think Cirrus, I know, do. There's several other manufacturers I think that do have them, but a lot of them don't. This is a button. We don't have to even have the autopilot turned on. If I'm flying around, and whether I'm hand flying an IMC or I'm VFR and I get disoriented, I can press that level button. It's going to automatically engage my autopilot. I'll see a level indication for my lateral mode. I'll see a level indication for my vertical mode, and it's going to bring the aircraft back to level flight. And that's the whole intent of that button. So if you start getting yourself into a situation where you're fighting spatial disorientation, or you have a passenger that's starting to feel uncomfortable, you can press the level button and it will bring you back to level flight. So a great button for some potential, a little more potential safety. Talking more safety brings us right into our electronic stability and protection, or what we call ESP. No, we're not reading your minds, but we are trying to help you, and we're trying to keep you essentially in a safe envelope, safe flying envelope. So flight protection while you're hand flying. So if ESP is on when the autopilot is off, we can correct for bank, for pitch, for airspeeds, and it will engage the servos trying to get us back into this protective envelope. If we do go outside of our ESP envelope, if we're in that for at least 10 seconds within a 20-second time period, the autopilot will automatically engage level mode. You'll get the OR alert telling you engaging autopilot. You'll see the level annunciations for your lateral and your vertical mode, and it'll bring the aircraft back to level flight. So this is a great safety tool that is automatically built into the system. So let's break this down just a little bit more. With this, well, let's take a look at our roll, our bank protection here. The system itself is trying to discourage banking beyond 45 degrees. If we take a look at the picture on the left, we see those double bars on the attitude indicator. That is my ESP limit. If I go past that limit, notice how the bars now move to the 30-degree mark. What you're going to see is I increase the bank more and more past that 45-degree mark. The servos are going to start fighting me. They are going to start commanding me back to level flight. Now, there are ways we can disable this, especially I automatically think to doing steep turns with my students. I want to get to 45 or I want to get to 50 degrees. We do have the ability to turn off ESP. But normal flight, generally speaking, we're probably not going to that extreme of a bank angle. We talked about banking wise. We also protect and keep a safe envelope pitch wise. So this, I'm forgetting which airframe I pulled this from, but there you can kind of see a limit. And this on the picture, it's if you pitch more than 10 degrees down, the system's going to chart bringing that nose back up. And then if I go up to about 12.5, 13 degrees, it's going to try to drive my nose back down. Now this was for this particular picture, but this will vary based on the airframe. So very much refer to your aircraft flight manual supplement or your AFMS for more specifics on your aircraft. As an example, the 208, the Cessna 208, its limits are 16.5 degrees up as well as down, whereas say an A36, it's 21 degrees up and 25 degrees down. So there's some different limits based on the airframe, based on what you're flying. So keep an eye on that. With this, we talked about bank, we've talked about pitch. We do also try to protect for speed. In this case here, we'll talk the high-speed protection first. We're trying to keep you from going past V&E. Low speed does the same thing, tries to keep you from going into a stall, so by pitching up or pitching down. By default, this is disabled at 200 feet AGL, so as we're rolling into the flare, I don't want ESP kicking in, trying to lower the nose when I don't necessarily want it to. So if you're flying low, we automatically know that ESP is disabled. This does require a PFD, a Garmin primary flight display, such as a G500 or a TXi display, and or a GTN with a valid terrain database. So overspeed protection, in this case, when the autopilot's on, certain modes are descending. So you started pitching the aircraft down, but we forgot to pull the power back, or we didn't pull the power back enough. Airspeed starts increasing, going into yellow arc, starting to get close to that red arc. We're going to see a max speed displayed on our GMC. You'll also notice your vertical mode changes to an indicated airspeed mode, and it's going to automatically start raising that nose up. It wants to keep us low. It's trying to keep us from going past or never exceed speed. Once the aircraft slowed down, then it can resume that previous mode. That whatever mode we were on, say we were in a vertical speed mode on descent, that mode would go to our arm. It would go white on our display, or you'd see it go to the small letters on the bottom of the 605 until the aircraft slowed down enough so it could re-engage that appropriate mode. Underspeed protection, very similar here. Once again, active when the autopilot's on. We're discouraging operation below some minimally established airspeeds. Imagine we're flying along and we're not paying attention. We've accidentally pulled the power back too far, or I started to climb and didn't add enough power, and the aircraft starts getting close to stall speed. What's going to happen? Same thing as our overspeed. Our autopilot's going to kick into an IAS mode, or indicated airspeed mode, and it's going to pitch the nose down. It's going to try to get more air over that wing. It wants to keep us above stall speed. You'll also get this alert of airspeed, but yeah, definitely get that alert airspeed if you're in an altitude critical mode. You start getting too low. Obviously, we're not going to take the control away, especially under 200 AGL, but we're going to at least alert you that we're getting slow. We need to do something. Once the aircraft increase, the speeds increase, then that mode, whatever previous mode we had, will re-engage. So let's talk a little bit about some of our abnormal operations. If something fails, what's the system going to do? Now, we're not going to be able to cover every potential failure, every potential issue you could run into. I don't have enough time for that. So if you have the autopilot, if you're flying with it, please refer back to your AFMS, your flight manual supplement. That's going to go into a lot more detail than what I'm going to go into here, but we're going to talk a couple basic things that we can see with the autopilot. First and foremost here, you see a flashing yellow AP button. If I see this button, you're also going to get an oral alert. You'll hear it a couple times, and then the light is going to go away. So whether I hit the disconnect on my yoke, whether I hit the AP button on there, hitting that button twice is going to turn us off. And there we go. If you have some sort of a trim failure, and this is a great example here, the yellow light is simply going to keep flashing. So in this case, we'll also get the alert on our right-hand side of our display. In this case, we need to trim the elevator up a little bit. We have an elevator trim fail. So we can recorrect the trim and continue on. Basic recovery there is if you have some sort of a trim failure, grip the control wheel firmly, disconnect the autopilot, retrim the aircraft. Don't try to fight the servos. They're only going to fight harder. So disconnect it, gain control of the aircraft, retrim as need be. If everything kind of evens out, then we can think about re-engaging. Should something fail altogether, in this case here, the autopilot fails altogether, you're going to get a red AP light, and you're going to get alert until you acknowledge it. You kind of see it flashing here. The acknowledgement's going to go. It's going to keep going until I hit that disconnect button or I hit the AP button on the 605. That's telling me whether a circuit breaker got pulled, whether something else internally has failed. Acknowledge it. Once you've acknowledged it, your hand flying the aircraft will continue on with our flight. If a mode drops for any reason, that's when you're going to get the yellow flight director blinking at us here. So an example here, I manually change a CDI source. I go from GPS course guidance over to VOR. If I change it myself, you're going to see a mode revert back to this roll mode here. But a different enunciation than what we're going to see in the autopilot. The autopilot, if you see it flashing, means we've disconnected it. Flight director means it's disengaged for some reason there, and it's still actively flying it. So a couple basic potential scenarios or situations you could run into. Please look at your flight manual supplement. That's going to go into much more detail, and it's going to get more aircraft specific than what I'm able to do here tonight. So we've talked about system layouts, we've talked about the hardware, we've talked about different enunciations we're going to see, even some abnormal stuff. So let's get into a scenario. How are we actually going to use this in flight, excuse me. As a quick refresher, if anybody's running a G500, our legacy display here, we've got our bug selections on the left. We can modify those with the knob selections. This unit interfaced with the 605 allows us to make the selections. I could set a heading bug here. I could do, I'm going to do my altitude pre-selects on the display. If I change a vertical speed on my primary flight display, you'll see the same speed. You'll see the same change on your 605. So there's some communication back and forth there. Whatever's easier, whatever's more comfortable for you to use. TXi, it is a touchscreen. Anything with those big highlighted boxes, you can tap on them and adjust. If you change your IIS, your indicated airspeed on the display, and you're in an indicated airspeed mode, you'll see that change immediately on the 605. You don't have to adjust it in both places. Same for vertical speed, just like the G600. So some redundancy there. And then we also have the dual concentric knobs for turbulence, or for the tactile feel of turning a knob versus using the touchscreen. Great. You can use either one, both perfectly acceptable. So for this scenario here, quick, easy flight. We're going from New Century over to the Napoleon VOR for the Kayla 3 arrival over to St. Louis. Pretty quick, pretty easy flight. And so doing this flight, we can also highlight all the different features the autopilot's going to bring to us. So on departure, we're getting ready to go off, getting ready to take off. HCC instructs us, climb and fly runway heading, climb and maintain 3,000. A simple, easy instruction, pretty common for us. Pilot action for us, I'm going to go ahead and set my heading bug on my primary flight display, and I can go ahead and engage heading mode. Notice how my autopilot's not turned on yet. If I look on the 605, the AP button is still grayed out. If I look on the TXi screen here, the center section, I don't see AP lit up. I know I'm simply just commanding the flight director at this point. And then, as we said before, verify what your active mode is. I see heading on top on the 605. I see heading in green on my TXi display. That's my active lateral mode. Now we can set the altitude on my primary flight display, roll my altitude selector to 3,000, and I can go so far as, say, set my climb speed. In this case, I set 125. So I could hit IAS, I could roll that up and down wheel until I get to 125, or I could use the touchscreen or the knob on my TXi display, and I could set it there as well, whichever is easier. Other things we want to point out, for vertical mode, we want to verify that IAS, our indicated airspeed mode, is active, and we're going to verify that ALTS, altitude target select, is active, or is armed, excuse me. That's why we see it in white on the TXi, or you see it in these small numbers down at the bottom of the 605. So we start climbing off, we clear for takeoff, we go full power, we get off the ground. Per the aircraft flight manual supplements, double check this, is upon reaching 800 AGL, that's our minimum autopilot engagement, we're going to go ahead and activate the autopilot. Simply press the AP button, and now we're going to fly the heading mode, which we pre-selected on the ground, and it's going to try to start flying at 125, what we pre-selected on the ground. We've got enough other stuff in the aircraft to worry about. I'm working checklist. I'm dealing with control with ATC. They're probably going to kick me over to approach or center here soon. So whatever we can do on the ground to help us, so much the better. Another common one for us. All right, we're going to turn left, heading 090, climb and maintain 7,000. Simple for us. Roll your altitude, roll your heading bug over to, in this case, 090. Verifying that heading mode is still active, we're going to reset our altitude bug. If we're still in the climb, all I need to do is raise it up to 7,000 feet and let the aircraft keep climbing. If I leveled off before they told me that it would climb, then I'll re-engage IAS as need be and continue my climb out. Same thing as before though, make sure ALTS is still white, still armed, make sure heading mode is still active, make sure IAS is still active. Verify, verify, verify. New one for us here, proceed direct to ANX, the Napoleon VOR, climb and maintain 15,000. So we can do this in a couple of orders. In this case here, I elected to do direct to on my navigator, whether it's the GNS, whether it's the GTN, direct to Napoleon, and then I can engage nav mode. When I do that, and then we'll also verify our altitude. Set the altitude to 15,000. If I need to re-engage IAS just like before, great, I can re-engage it, continue my climb out, and we're going to verify. Something to be careful of when you're doing this is if you do your direct to and you get distracted, you haven't reset your nav, you haven't set the autopilot to nav, if our CDI gets more than about a half scale deflection, then what you would see is GPS in white and an armed status. If you're more than half deflection, but anytime we hit nav, it will arm it, and then we are responsible. We need to drive it around through using heading mode to get us onto that course. So the other option could be to arm nav and then set your direct to. Two different ways, same end result for us. As we start climbing up, as we get to 15,000, as I go back a slide, notice how in the top on my TXi or on the 605, indicated airspeed mode, IAS mode is active. ALTS, altitude target select, is armed. As I get close to my altitude, ALTS, altitude target select, is active, and it's also displaying the altitude. And notice now ALT, altitude hold, is armed, meaning once I get to 15,000, the aircraft's going to level off and it's going to maintain that altitude for me. And ultimately, we want to see ALT and the selected altitude in green. If we see that, we know we're leveled off and we're good. Now here we're en route. I've seen with some other autopilots, we're getting updated barrel settings as we're flying along. If you change your barrel setting on this, and we need to climb up a little bit, the system will do it. Because we told it, and because we see ALT, all it cares about is maintaining that altitude. So we're en route, we can stay at 15,000. As we start coming in, we get this instruction here: crossing the Coop intersection, descend via the arrival, maintain 7,000. This is where the VNAV capability and the GTN and its latest software and the GFC 600 really shine, in my opinion. So for us, they told us climb, descend, and maintain 7,000. So I'm going to roll my altitude selector down to my lowest altitude. In this case, roll it to 7. I'm going to arm my VNAV. Now, unlike, say, the GFC 700, where if you armed it too early, when you got closer in, it made you rearm it. Essentially, you had to press that VNAV button again. This one won't do that. I can arm it however early I want to arm it. So I arm VNAV, and I'm going to verify my statuses. So GPS is still my lateral status. Altitude hold at 15,000 is still active. And notice I have VPath. My vertical path is armed, meaning it's ready to accept that vertical navigation. A couple things to point out. On this case, we're still using the TXi, but you'd see the same annunciations come up on a G500, is your VDI, the vertical deviation indicator. And notice how it's a magenta V instead of a magenta diamond. That magenta diamond will be your approach. You'll also see your next altitude constraint that is being fed over from the GTN, as well as the intended or expected vertical speed target, that little box on the lower right side there. So we've got some very vital information there, and the system is going to automatically fly with that. So as we come on down, pretty much we can follow that down. With the Kayla 3 arrival, there are multiple step downs. There's multiple altitude constraints. This GTN is doing all the hard work for us. All I have to do is manage my throttle, manage my speed. Beyond that, I'm letting the autopilot do the hard work for me. So we get down to the bottom there, we're at 7,000, we're cruising along. The end of this arrival ends with a vector leg, a manual sequence. So we get some updated instructions. ATC comes back, says descend and maintain 3,000. Very easy for us to do. I'm going to start, once again, rolling my altitude selector down. We're going to work it kind of the opposite direction now than how we did initially. So I'm going to roll my altitude selector down to 3,000. I'm going to select a desired vertical mode. In this case, as I said earlier, I like using vertical speed in the descent. So I would hit vertical speed, and with it being vertical speed, I can adjust the speed either on the TXi display, or I can use that up and down wheel to dial in the appropriate speed that I want. Once again, we're verifying in this case that vertical speed is now active. I've selected it for 800 feet down, 800 feet per minute down. And I want to verify ALTS, altitude target select, is active. If I see that, I know it's going to capture my altitude at 3,000. Starting to go into an approach phase. So we're down at 3,000, we're flying along, and ATC gives us a heading to intercept. So we're going to fly a heading of 090, intercept the localizer, maintain 3,000 until established, cleared for the ILS 1-2 right approach. Nothing we haven't all seen before. We're going to set the heading bug on our primary flight display. I'm going to dial it into 090. I'm going to engage my heading mode, so now it follows that heading bug. As with everything else, anytime I change a mode, I want to verify it. So we're verifying that heading is active. Now, when you're cleared for the approach, pretty industry standard. I heard the words cleared for the approach. I'm going to arm my approach. I'm going to hit the APR button on there, and I'm going to verify a couple of annunciations here as well. Obviously, I need to verify that I'm on the correct CDI source. If I'm getting ready for an ILS or a localizer, I'll need to make sure I switch over to green needles or that the system does it for me. If I'm running a GPS, I'm doing an LNAV plus V, an LPV, I want to make sure I'm still on magenta needles. In this case, we're going to verify our lateral modes. So we were on GPS course guidance coming down on the arrival, and now we're going to kick over to an ILS. We're running raw data, raw navigate data. So when we armed approach mode, I see localizer in white as my armed status, telling me that it's ready to intercept the localizer, and I say GS, telling me the system is ready to capture the glide slope for that approach. If I don't see either of those, then I'm not going to fly the approach. It's not going to capture for me. So verify. Those are very critical items that we verify. And then as we come in, Then you'll see, in this case, we're starting to intercept the localizer. So we're on green needles on my HSI. I've got local 1 listed in there. If I look at my lateral status, I'm on localizer course guidance, meaning it's captured and tracking the localizer. And then as my glide slope needle comes in, then you'll see it switch over to glide slope. So now localizer is active lateral, glide slope is the active vertical, and it's going to fly it down for me. Now, once we get to 200 feet AGL, this is when our autopilot has to be turned off. We're going to disengage it, whether we hit it off or hit the switch on our yoke, whether we hit the AP button on the GMC itself, then we hand flight, come in for the approach. So theoretically, we can do this. We've done this entire flight. As soon as I got 800 feet off the ground, I turned the autopilot on, and then I didn't touch the control until I got to pretty much all the way through the end of the approach till I got to 200 AGL, when I had to disengage. Beyond that, the system is capable of flying the rest of that approach, or the rest of that flight for us. Text-wise, a couple items you guys may want to take a look at. The G500, G600, or the TXi Pilot's Guide. It does have some autopilot information there, especially when it comes to its enunciation. So take a look at that. Two other pieces of literature I highly, highly recommend that you read through are the GFC 600 Pilot's Guide, and a very critical piece of guidance is the Aircraft Flight Manual Supplement. Very, very highly encourage and strongly encourage that you guys read through that, know any sort of hangups or anything unique to that install. Now, a question we do get quite a bit is, when is my aircraft going to be on there? Is it in progress? Is it planned? I want my aircraft on the list. I want this autopilot. We can find this information out. If you go to garmin.com/GFC600 and hit the supported aircraft tab underneath there, it'll show you a list of current aircraft that are supported. And this screenshot was taken as of a few days ago here. But what's currently certified for it, underneath that, you'll see what aircraft are currently going through certification for the autopilot. And then you'll see a list of planned aircraft. What aircraft are planned in the next 12 calendar months? So we give you a little bit of guidance. Here's what's coming. Here's what we're working on. Is this going to be your aircraft or not? Let you guys interact with there. Another one we get is, hey, I'm willing to loan my aircraft. I'm willing to give you my aircraft if that'll help with the certification. Well, that is very much a great, great help for us. Further down on that same page, there are a couple links there. If you want to see your aircraft added to the approved model list for the STC, you can put a request in for that. There's also a separate link if you want to volunteer your aircraft to be used for that certification. So a couple great resources there. The more requests we get for a certain aircraft, the higher up that list it's going to go, the earlier it's going to get certified. So play with that and get your aircraft on the list, and hopefully we can get it out to you guys. All right, I'm going to mute the mic here for just a second. We're going to take a couple questions, a couple common questions that we have. Feel free to always explore more here at garmin.com/aviation. Down at the bottom is our resource if you need to find your local dealer. You can also find more training products through the flygarmin.com page over to the training tab, and that's where the training side likes to live. So give me just a minute. We're going to review a couple questions here. I'll be back. We'll answer a couple common questions, and we'll go from there. Okay, thanks for being patient with me, guys. We're taking a look through a couple of the questions there. First one we got is talking about the auto alerts. Are we going to be able to hear that through the headsets? Yes, the Autopilot, you will hear those alerts. They're going to be linked into your audio panel. So yes, you will hear those alerts, especially if you disconnect an Autopilot or if you get an Autopilot fail. Yes, you will see those on there. Other one was asking kind of the altitude hold. I'm going to go back a couple slides here and back to my scenario. I think was a good slide. Kick forward just a little bit. Bear with me here. So there we go. This is our altitude. So when do we see altitude illuminated? You're going to see it on the display itself. So whether you have a primary flight display like TXi, and you'll see it listed as altitude hold, or you'll see it on the GMC 605 when the aircraft gets to it, whether it's through an altitude select, or if you just hit the alt button itself, then it'll automatically go to level off to whatever altitude you're currently at. So those are the times you're going to see both of those. So, and I think with that, I think that's about all I've got for you guys this evening. I'll hand this back over to Eric. Thanks for having me on tonight, guys.
Wow, a lot of great information. A big thank you again to the Garmin training team for that presentation. And just a reminder, there was a lot of information, certainly some questions answered there at the end. We did record the entire presentation. You'll be able to come back as early as tomorrow to the webinar archive, sporties.com/webinars, or search our YouTube channels, and you'll be able to see the entire presentation. Following immediately after we wrap up tonight's presentation, we'll have a very short 5-question survey. And one of the last questions you'll get to are any suggestions for future topics you'd like to see in the Sporties webinar series. So we do invite your participation and ideas of additional content that we can bring to you. It can be specific to Garmin. It can be something completely unrelated. With respect to our existing schedule, we do have our next presentation scheduled for just a few weeks from now on March 7th. And that topic will be Data Link Weather presented by Sporty's John Zimmerman. And then a little bit later in March the 28th, we will welcome in ForeFlight and Ryan McBride, a designer for ForeFlight, who will be talking about all the latest and greatest associated with ForeFlight. And that takes us right up into Sun and Fun in Lakeland, Florida. So if you're in the Florida area or looking to travel down for the first big aviation show of the year, Garmin will have a major presence as they do every year. They'll be hosting in-person seminars throughout the week. Sporties will have a large presence as well, and we invite you to stop by and visit both our exhibit locations. With that, we're going to bid you a good evening. For Matt Clark and Gabe Parkinson at Garmin Aviation, I'm Eric Radke with Sporties. Thank you so much for joining us. Safe flying, and hope to see you back again very soon.